To say that the Camp Blood films have been a rocky road to traverse, I feel would be underselling the situation that I've found myself in. We are now 8 entries into a series that could be best described as a fairly generic and technically questionable first feature effort from a fledgling filmmaker, a slightly enhanced retelling of that same first film that's half and half clip show to new footage, the best one to date that Sterling Entertainment refuses to acknowledge as even canon, one of the worst films Mark Polonia has ever made, 2 of the worst films Dustin Ferguson has ever made, and 2 of the worst movies I have personally seen in a long time, and a film with a half-decent script that was utterly buggered by the budget being too low to properly realise it. In our last trip to Camp Blood, I actually kind of came away half pleasantly surprised. This was the first time in a long time that the series had actually bothered to do something more than just taking half a dozen first-time actors, dumping them in the woods with a script written on a cocktail napkin and telling them that unless they figured it out and put at least one set of tits in the movie somewhere, they wouldn't be allowed to come home. Camp Blood 666 was by no means perfect, but it at least had a somewhat developed idea tying the clown killer to a Satanist cult rather than just whatever the hell the last 5 films tried to do. I didn't personally love it, but up to this point it was probably the best canon Camp Blood movie to have been released. So heading into today's film, It Follows, Camp Blood 7, I was honestly just kind of nervously apprehensive. There were only really 2 ways this film could go, which is that it built on the steam of 666 and delivered something as good or better, or it defaulted back to cheap, quick and messy, and I'd find myself once again throwing another 65 or so minutes down the toilet. And in wishing for a better Camp Blood movie, dear viewer, I appear to have unleashed something of a monkey's paw of a dilemma onto myself. So, once again, we have another completely clean reboot of the franchise. In this universe, Camp Blackwood has been reimagined as an actual summer camp. Which, how have I not noticed that it's taken 8 films to set a series called Camp Blood at a summer camp? Wild, but that's on me. Anyway, in the opening of the film, a narration explains that at one point Camp Blackwood was a thriving summer camp with fun activities for the kids and a beautiful surrounding area. Then, one day, 2 of the camp's counsellors wound up dead and some kids went missing, with locals and some kids saying that a killer clown did it. The police investigated before closing the camp down, and the local legend of a killer clown who stalks Camp Blood became synonymous with the area. Jump forward many, many years and we're introduced to a group of 35-year-old high school students who are preparing to go on a 5-day road trip for fall break. There's Jenny, our lead girl of the group, whose sunny disposition helps keep the gang together, Lizzie, the bookworm of our movie who's obsessed with folklore, Terry, a gentle gent who's looking for love, Anna, a sexually frustrated party girl who cannot stand her ex and explodes at a moment's notice, and Drake, one of the biggest arsehole characters I've ever had the misfortune to watch. He's not quite as bad as Alan from Return to Sleepaway Camp, but he's misogynistic, ableist, and takes every possible opportunity to attack his ex, Anna. He's obnoxious, loud, and front and centre for most of the movie, so jump off here if that's going to be an issue, guys, because it isn't getting any better than that. The gang are introduced via them bickering about what they're going to be doing for their 5-day road trip and who gets to sit where. Eventually, they get on the road, and after a short while, Lizzie recounts more or less verbatim what the narrator said at the start of the film about the history of Camp Blackwood, followed by her increasingly becoming paranoid about them encountering the killer clown. This is paused briefly, however, when they spot a hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere and pull over, initially to offer him a lift, and then basically demanding that he accepts a ride from them, which he reluctantly agrees to do. This is Bishop, and he's heading to Camp Blackwood. The gang tell him that they've just been catching up on the history of that place, and they decide that it could be a fun, hokey little detour to take Bishop up to the camp to explore the place. Bishop explains that he's heading there because 4 months prior, his wife disappeared on a nature trail at Camp Blackwood and hasn't been seen since. He raised it to the police, who did a basic search but didn't find anything and then closed the case. Dissatisfied with that, Bishop quit his job and began hiking the entire footprint of Camp Blackwood looking either for his wife or one of the many, many other people who've disappeared at Camp Blackwood. Hoping to ideally bring closure for himself, but failing that, maybe at least finding out where all these people are vanishing to in order to bring closure to any of the other grieving relatives of the lost. This kind of turns Anna on, and after a brief argument between her and Drake, the team eventually decide to take a pit stop at a local small-town mechanics. Drake insults Terry and then notices that they're selling firewood and half-jokingly suggests that they take the wood so that they can light a fire when they get to the camp. This instantly summons two of the worst hillbilly characters that I have ever personally seen, who basically tell the gang to leave immediately or risk violent alternatives. They refuse to believe that Drake was joking about the firewood, which, fair enough, I wouldn't trust him either, and before things can escalate further they get back on the road. Now, say it with me, boys and girls. Obligatory extended driving sequence, obligatory arrive at the camp sequence, obligatory randomly wandering around in the woods sequence, obligatory find the camp blood sign sequence, and with that we arrive at the main campgrounds. They wander around a bit and get their bearings, and Bishop says he intends to set up a base camp at the camp while offering to guide the gang back to their car after thanking them for a lift. However, while the gang are titting about in the woods, the clown killer finds their car and does something with it. Because when Bishop brings them back to where their car was, it's gone. While Drake and co lose their absolute minds over where their ride could be, it seems the clown killer either drove the car back to the mechanics or he can just kind of teleport, because either way, the hillbillies, who are still absolutely raging that someone would dare even joke about taking their twigs, end up getting stalked by the clown killer, who offs them both pretty quickly. While that's going on, Bishop leads the gang back to the campgrounds and they decide they might as well settle in for the night and head out to call the cops in the morning. So, they go to find some firewood and, say it with me, obligatory fireside lore drop sequence, as Lizzie again gives us the background of what happened at Camp Blackwood and some info about the killer clown. At which point Terry needs to take a piss, so Jenny offers to go with him. The pair end up having a heart-to-heart where Terry hints that he has feelings for Jenny, who makes it clear it is not reciprocated. But while finishing up, Jenny notices that off in the distance, there's a clown with a knife watching them. By the time they make it back to the camp, a flash storm has touched down and the gang all have to flee into one of the cabins, where they decide they might as well go to bed. Anna tries to sleep with Bishop, but is soundly rebuffed. In the early hours of the morning, Terry wakes up to the sight of a clown looking through one of the cabin windows at him. He goes to investigate and winds up on the stabby end of the clown's machete. And this basically sets up the mechanism for the rest of the film, as the gang wake up to find that Terry is missing and they decide to split up to try and find him, leading to, as you can expect, the clown essentially stalking them down one at a time, leading to a somewhat predictable finale in which one of our cast members alone must face down the deadly killer if they want to make it out alive. In a very by-the-numbers finale, will Bishop find his wife? Will Drake take a course on empathy and anger management? And will Anna get to fuck or fight something? I don't know. Her character seems to really want to fuck or fight something. Anyway, all this and more will be answered if you check out Camp Blood 7. And at the top of the video I mentioned that this film was something of a monkey's paw of a production. And that's because for every single Camp Blood movie that I've seen, I've always come away a bit disappointed and hoping that the next one will finally manage to nail the basics of technical ability and script writing. Not even to produce something exemplary, but just to give me something that I can at least point to and say, hey, this one is actually worth your time whether you're invested in the franchise or not. And it's kind of painful for me to say, but with Camp Blood 7, it seems my wish has finally been granted in the barest of minimal ways possible. Like, objectively, I can't say this is a bad movie, but it hurts to say through gritted teeth that this is passably okay. The single biggest problem with this whole thing is with the script, and the issue? It gives the absolute barest minimum and not a shred more than that. The plot itself is basically just a runaround for 60-ish minutes, which in and of itself isn't a major issue, as there have been plenty of movies that have been folks get stalked in the woods for 90 minutes. It's more about how you choose to present that plot than the plot itself being an issue. But here, the film's basically single gear. There's no plot twists, no out-of-left-field moments, no escalations of the plot, no character complexities, no interesting or witty dialogue, no satisfying closures. Quite literally, it's what you see is what you get. A group of stereotypical horror archetypes go to the woods, do some summer camp stuff, and slowly one by one get picked off. That's it. That's the whole movie. And this film isn't exactly in a rush to get the plot out there either. At 69 minutes, it plods for most of the runtime, effectively abandoning the audience to view arguments and aimless wandering for long periods of time. Even at a shorter runtime, it still has to pad itself to get it to that end goal, which is crazy when you consider what you can do with a stalker slasher feature. The act structurings are tad lopsided as well, with the first and second acts running for ever so slightly longer than the third act. The fact that the film's seemingly unable to shift gear and ramp up means that we end up with roughly 45 minutes of the film just idling, going through the motions, with single-layer characters who don't really get any kind of development until roughly 3 minutes before they're bumped off. The third act sees an ever so slight shift up in terms of intensity, but even then it's struggling to really generate any kind of horror. I think part of that's down to the fact that most of this film takes place in broad daylight, which in and of itself is its own damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because if you film it at night you're reliant on lighting, good lighting at that, otherwise the audience won't be able to see anything, but shooting in the day with no real attempt at grading to the genre means it feels more like a Benny Hill sequence than a horror sequence when people start running. As mentioned, the characters are kind of one note, which makes it really hard to care about them or even remember them, truthfully. The dialogue isn't exactly the greatest in the world either, and it feels like an extra draft or at the very least some on-set workshopping might have been needed, as there are multiple points across the runtime where our cast have to deliver lines that just don't scan right and lack the cadence of the person speaking its accent, which in and of itself leads to moments where line deliveries just feel clunky and awkward. The script also seems kind of non-committal to a tone as well. It almost feels like it's hedging its bets, trying to give a grimmer horror element to convince folks this is the real deal, but also courting campy horror as well for the bad movie crowd. But even with those two lanes, it's almost ghostly for how heavy the tone implementation is. It seems like a film that would rather not commit to making the audience feel stuff over picking one and doing it wrong. In fact, that's kind of the best way to sum the script up for this film, non-committal. It's not here to bring any new ideas, it's not here to strike out against the other films, it's not here to rock the boat. What this script is a slow, sturdy, generic trudge through a woods-based slasher, with uninteresting and slightly irritating characters who don't feel comfortable playing the roles they're playing, working with the written equivalent of Mist. It's not bad, but it's the absolute barest minimum needed for me to not say it's bad. And in many ways, that frustrates me more than had it just been bad, because then at least I could have argued for improvements. As it stands, everything's passable to just below passable. And because the brief and expectations for this film have been set so low by the filmmakers, the only feedback I can offer is some variation on do what you're doing, but good. While I can appreciate that this is the first Camp Blood film to just have a script that delivers what it sets up, what it promises to deliver is so minimal, had they promised any less, they'd have probably been in a deficit. The script was written by Amy Suzuki. She has 2 writing credits, this was her first and her last was in 2024 for the film The Last Chainsaw Massacre. She seems to work in a few different departments from acting to makeup, and given this was her first attempt at script writing, I think I'd be interested to see where her writing skills took her, honestly. The film was directed by Mark Polonia, who we've spoken about a couple of times on the channel by this point. This is Mark's second entry into the franchise, as he previously directed Camp Blood First Slaughter, which was not as good as this film, to put it diplomatically. He currently has 96 directing credits as of the time of writing, with at least 5 films released in 2025 alone. The guy's a machine, honestly. But it's here really where the fortunes for this film kind of turn around, as on the direction front we actually don't fare too badly. Now again, everything I'm going to say from this point onwards is bearing in mind the kind of quality that we've been dealing with all the previous Camp Blood movies. But the direction here, I feel, is probably the most competent the series has had so far. Mark's work here is considered, consistent, there's been clear thought as to how sequences are constructed and structured. This is a small crew production, and Mark isn't going over the top here in trying to realise anything grand, but he seems to have communicated what he wants effectively to the people he was working with, and the end result is a film that isn't exactly breaking new ground, but it's sturdy, almost to its own detriment. Because while I'm very happy that this film doesn't screw up the directional work, it really doesn't try to do anything interesting either. It almost by default becomes the best directed Camp Blood film, sheerly because it doesn't fail, because it doesn't really try. It's a film on autopilot, working with not a lot of money, and it's very much shooting for function over form. Now, part of me wants to congratulate Polonia for not trying to overcomplicate things as his peers have previously and to just really try and nail the basics, but then part of me sits here and thinks, we're 8 films in and one of the best entries in this franchise is a very milquetoast middle-of-the-road offering that is seemingly terrified to rock the boat in any way, shape or form. It's a very similar story with the direction of the cast. Barring 1 or 2 exceptions, the majority of the cast feel like they had some on-set discussions with Polonia on what to do and how to work with the set space. And Mark seems happy for them to work with props and to explore the space, in a limited fashion, but as mentioned, that freedom seems to have started and ended with that, with the dialogue seemingly being rigidly enforced as word perfect or as close to that as it can be. It feels like the cast weren't really allowed to experiment with line deliveries, and whether it was due to a lack of time, budget or inclination, the end result is a bit of a scattershot run on cast direction, with some moments being quite palatable and passable, while a significant chunk is just clunky and a bit awkward, very much working against the film. It doesn't help either that seemingly whoever they got in to play the clown killer either couldn't take physical acting notes or wasn't really told how to menacingly walk, because in this film, our clown killer bounces around the location with a positive spring in his step. And that isn't done as a self-aware, goofy kind of I'm so happy gutting people spring in the step. That's a moment where the actor just doesn't know how to bring intimidating energy without facial reactions. And Mark doesn't really frame him to have any kind of menace either. And I think he realised that once this film hit post, because there are multiple times where they play generic dun 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 style meme sounds over the clown killer where the language of the film has gone badly wrong. It's only really again down to the fact that the previous actors to play the clown killers have performed so badly in the role that this one kind of ends up being in the top 3 best actors to play the role just almost by default. It's not that he's good, it's just that everyone else has been so bad. On the Cine front, once again, it's just the basics. What we have here is a perfectly serviceable job that, while not faultless, is just about good enough. Which, if you know anything about my thoughts on good enough, I seldom think it is. Compositions are largely considered, clear and crisp, with only a few soft focus offerings on hand throughout. Thought has been given to B-roll, especially when it comes to the kills, which, in spite of the clearly low budget, at least do bother to use practical effects and they do try to make the most out of them when they occur. I think the big issue here is just that it's functional to the point of minimalism. Every shot is set up either as a wide or mid, occasionally a headshot. There's no real thought put into the angle of the shots or how it would read to an audience. Tracking and panning are rare and a tiny bit wobbly when they do happen. The sad fact is, this is by far some of the best cinematography the Camp Blood films has had, which is kinda nuts to me. Lighting is largely kept to natural light, any nighttime stuff is backlit to the barest minimum, but there isn't really any attempt to get creative with lighting setups. Colour use is also kind of kept to whatever's local to the camera and not much else. So expect plenty of clashing colour schemes and blues, greens and reds to be the main flavour of the day. The film does struggle with its continuity in places as well, the most notable being a scene towards the end where Drake finds a puddle of blood that continuously disappears and reappears depending on whether the shots are mid or a wide. All of this is tied together in a stretched edit that lets sequences breathe for just a little too long. That's not to say that the cutting is bad particularly, in fact, for the most part it's pretty solid. Just that I really feel that this could have lost 10 to 15 minutes on another pass through and been a significantly tighter work as a result. Performance wise, we seem to have a bit of a stable of B-movie actors here. Almost everyone involved in this film has either directly worked with Sterling Entertainment, Wild Eye or The Asylum, and that's kind of the quality to expect going into this. By no means good and veering wildly between entertainingly awful, passable and unwatchable. The strongest performer here for my money is Greta Volkova as Jenny, who sounds the least melodramatic, gets a decent range of emotions to work through across the runtime, and gets some pretty meaty physical acting pieces too, which really helps to round out her character. I can't say she blew me away, but of all the cast, she's the one that I wouldn't mind catching in something else. Wyatt Wood as Drake is a masterclass in how to play an insufferable arsehole. And to that end, I really have to give him credit. His take on Drake was absolutely to the brief, and I feel like, despite the fact I hate the character deeply, Wyatt himself aced the assignment here. However, easily the poorest performances in this have got to be from Jeff Kirkendall and Catherine Sue Young as Katie and Jeb, the two hillbilly gas station attendants. It's miraculous really to see a performer fail to do a redneck accent so badly that they accidentally also forget what their own accent is in the process. But here it is. They're low on physical presence, they struggle with remembering the script and just really didn't do it for me. God bless them, I trust they tried, but they weren't for me. And finally, the soundtrack. And it's still lots of royalty-free tracks, but we seem to be edging away from the generic Sterling audio library. Some tracks here got a spin that I haven't heard before, and it was a nice shake-up to actually be able to get a different tone and vibe to the franchise after at least 3 films that seemingly just pulled the same stock tracks over and over. I think it works really well here to pull the production up, and it's used rather effectively in my opinion. It Follows, Camp Blood 7 was released on Blu-ray in February 2020 following a 2017 release. It would later be reissued as part of the Camp Blood collection in 2021, and it would get a further reissue in December 2024, which I'm assuming is just a new printing rather than a whole other release. While the compilation version contains none of the solo extras, I'm assured that the standalone release does include a commentary with Mark Polonia and a trailer for the film, so there's that. No plans for a 4K release at this point, but as always, I do think this film would benefit from a remaster that used a lower compression rate, as there were moments in this where pixelation struck, particularly during the more chaotic scenes. Given that Camp Blood 666, for me, was considered the canon high bar for this franchise, and that film had terrible CG, wobbly shots, and a pretty mixed script, Camp Blood 7 feels frustrating to me, because they've essentially stripped the series right back to just the absolute barest minimums, and everything is good enough that I can't actively say that it's bad, but not good enough that I feel like it's a clean-cut recommendable film. It's sturdy but basic, and while I'll commend it for sincerely just trying to make a solid slasher on as low a budget as possible, for which it succeeds in my opinion, it's kind of the cheese pizza of this franchise. Uninspiring, unoriginal, and a little bit bland. By default of just not fucking everything up, it's kind of inadvertently become the best of the series. I don't think it quite pips Within the Woods for me, purely for how dry the script is. But on a technical level, it's no contest. This is the best Camp Blood film up to this point. Honestly, I have no idea where the series goes from here. Probably backwards if I've learnt anything up to this point. But just once, it would be nice to hope that Camp Blood 8 will take the sturdy base this creates and build something interesting and noteworthy on top of it. Only time will tell, but in the meantime, I think if you've watched the Brad Sykes trilogy of Camp Blood films and were looking for where to go next, this and Camp Blood 666 would absolutely be my recommendation.